programme. My name is Pat Cox. I'm a member of the board of YES, and it's a really great pleasure to share with my colleague from the board, Carl Bildt, the moderation of this session today. We are joined on this platform. You've had the President here, we've had the Prime Minister here, we've had ministers here, and now we have that other great constitutional arm of governance, which is the Parliament, Verkhovna Rada. We have 4 members. They are, like the entire Parliament, all young. One of them, who's on his 2nd round of election, might be described as a veteran because he's there since 2014. And just by way of background, I know everyone in Ukraine knows this because you're living with it. And everyone who is visiting may or may not know it, so let me not take it for granted. You've had here in this country, before independence, the Granite Revolution. You've had the Orange Revolution. You'd have the Revolution of Dignity at Maidan. And I believe this year was a ballot box democratic revolution because it has led to extraordinary and sweeping change. There is a certain sense, if we look at the 2 rounds of the presidential election, followed by the legislative election, that we had 3 elections where the Zelensky effect, if I might call it that, carried through from one to the other. Not uniquely, because there are other voices here, but where that effect was evident. And so this issue of what does the new Parliament look like? Number one, 80% of the deputies were never elected to the Parliament before. I actually myself have never met a Parliament where 80% were first-timers. That's already really interesting, full of new energy and ideas, and really complicated because the institutional memory is always one of those things that allows the new ones and the older ones to mix. Something that's getting better, touched on earlier, is gender balance. About 20% of the new Parliament is female. That's better than before. It needs to get better again, but that's how it is. Now, I'm going to stop there, that brief introduction, just to give a sense. Dramatic change. Much younger, great appetite to get on and reform things, and then you've got to scratch your head. How are we going to do all of that stuff? And I'm going to hand over to Carl, and Carl, you can ask everyone to introduce themselves so I can sit down and stop. Thank you.
I will do that. Thanks, Pat. Pat and I have been, we are of course all political foxes. We've been, I don't know, Pat, how long you've been in different parliaments. I was in our parliament for nearly a quarter of a century, which is far too long, according to most people, by the way. But I very much know the value of a parliament and the importance of a parliament, both in order to support an executive and to criticize an executive in order to make certain that democracy stays vibrant and moves things forward. You are new in more or less, sort of. Well, not everyone, but anyhow. I'm going to test you. I'm going to give you, each of you, one, if I'm kind, a minute and a half each. And in that one, you're going to say briefly who you are, and then you're going to say what's your political program and which are the biggest risks that you see for Ukraine. It's easy to have big promises, but it's also important to be aware of the risks. And you need to do that in a minute and a half, because politics is also the way, the art of compressing a message so that it becomes clear and comprehensible to all of the electorate that is out there and in the election that will come a couple of years from now.
Hello, everybody. It's a great pleasure for me to sit here on this stage, but I'm only one not new on this stage in this parliament.
Yep.
And we are talking about new Ukrainian political face, but not new Ukrainian political faces, but Ukrainian political face. Very interesting to talk about this point of view. And I prefer to talk about Ukrainian face in Ukrainian. Тому я перейду українською.
This is why
Я представляю партію
I represent the party Batkivshchina.
Ми були
We have been part of the previous parliament, we are part of the current parliament, we were in minority in the previous one, and we are minority now, so we don't have to get used to this reality. But in fact, why the topic for this panel discussion is of interest to me, because I remembered what Ukraine was associated with at the beginning of our independence. The new country on the map of the world, but it was associated with what? With Chernobyl, the biggest catastrophe in the environment that happened in the world at that time. What was the association with Ukraine for the last 5 years? War, Russian aggression against Ukraine, but also corruption and earning money on warfare. But at the same time, there were positive moments, and there are positive memories. In the post-Soviet space, Ukraine was also associated as the country of democracy, a country of people who have dignity to stand for their rights, to stand for their interests, and not being afraid of going out on the streets and standing for their rights. So the question is, what will be the face, the political face of Ukraine in future, given these new realities and new conditions? And of course, the biggest challenge for all of us, and for me in particular, is that this value of ours, this democracy, is to be preserved for future. We are working and living now in this turbo mode, and the concentration of power on the one hand would seem to be good, because the more power gives you more wings to fly and implement changes, and we do want the changes to happen. But I think that the concentration is not about concentrating power, but the concentration of responsibility. And responsibility are not wings, it's more like a burden. And if you're putting more and more weight on that burden, whether the athlete would be able to pull up that weight. So I don't really care that this weight would just press down to earth one athlete. It's more important that the country would survive and would be able to pull it up. But so at the same time, I'm a reserved optimist, because I think that for the first time in many years, with this optimism, binge of optimism of people and this trust of people to the new government, we really can make a lot of good things happen. And leadership here becomes key. The question is whether new leaders under new conditions, with that level of responsibility and that level of trust, to take up real leadership, not just to follow what people want, but to lead the people and to really change the country.
3 minutes, not 1.5. So you have to sort of get more discipline in order to get the message to the voters. But you want good things to happen, that's good to hear. Next one, 1.5 minutes.
Hello, everybody. My name is Slava Vakarchuk. I represent Holos Party. We are a new party in parliament, but I think we will have a long and successful story. First of all, let me reflect a little bit on the name of today's conference, Happiness Now. Yesterday, one of my good acquaintances, Professor Stanford Neil Ferguson, said a very right thing, that nobody can make you happy but yourself. Government cannot make you happy. You can make you happy, but government can make you unhappy. And that's what I believe. And we're trying to do our best in order to make sure that the government provides you with all tools that you'll be happy. Our program is very simple. Number one, Ukraine moves to Europe inevitably and irreversibly, NATO and EU. Number two, it's rule of law. Number three, it's the economy free for everybody and free from oligarchs. Number four, and probably it's one of the most important things, is accountable government. And number five, overarching it, is the interest of a Ukrainian, a single Ukrainian, a citizen of Ukraine, above all. From all these 5 items, I think today the most important for us, for Party Holos, take into account the things that are being done now in the parliament and politics, is number 2, which is rule of law. We think that strong institutions, not right people, but right institutions, in a long way can provide a sustainable, successful, and irreversible path for Ukraine to make it prosperous. And the biggest challenge, which I see, actually there are 2 of them. One external, which is how to stand against very serious and very, I would say, dangerous pressure, political and military pressure from our eastern neighbor, from Russian aggression. And number 2 is internal, and this is institutions, the question, are institutions more important than political, let's say, political conjuncture? So far, I think the second challenge is probably almost as big as the first one. We are focused and determined to fight against both of them. Thank you very much.
That was, we are improving. That was 2 minutes, and the message was institutions are more important than personalities for the long-term health of democracy. Next.
My name is Dmitro Razumkov. I'm the Speaker of the Parliament of Ukraine. I'm the new face. I'm a new face in the politics because our political force has never been in the previous parliament, and the party that delegated me to become part of this parliament and become the speaker is the majority in the parliament. And this is the change that Ukrainian people have been looking forward to for so many years. The objectives that were declared back at the presidential campaign, that we need to implement institutional changes, we need to bring new people into politics, because the old mechanisms have proven to be seriously deficient, and they've demonstrated the system is not working. Just to pick up on what Mr. Cox said, about 80% of new parliament members and increase of women in the parliament, this is a big merit of this political force that I represent. We do understand the challenges that we face. The war is number 1. Second is combating corruption. Unfortunately, there are 2 key problems that people have been battling with or pretending to be battling with, but it's not in reality happening, and people are expecting this. To pick up from what Sviatoslav said, related to happiness, something which is part of the name of this panel. Well, you know, happiness is, for many years, it was about becoming part of the political spectrum, to become a member of the parliament. People have not seen nothing happier than that, because they thought that that's, you know, like grabbing God by his beard, in other words, that they are now successful, that they are richer, they are above these other people. But the problem is that in most cases this happiness was available for a very minuscule group of people. They were grouped on these hills here in Kyiv, but that would deprive other people from happiness who live in a large country of Ukraine. And I think the main task that I see for myself, and I hope that the new parliament is aiming for, is to make sure that Ukraine is happy, that us, our children, while living in this country, to be able to honestly say that this is a happy country where we all live. In terms of risk, you all know them. External threats and that resistance that we're going to have inside the country. We're already feeling this, but we do understand that with consolidated joint position with everyone, those in majority and those who are not part of the majority, we will be able to change our country for better. For many of those who have come to the Parliament today, this is the first chance to change this state. But for the state, this can be the last chance, and we have to use that.
Thank you. Also clear. Please.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Halina Yanchenko, and I am a new member of the parliament from Sluga Naroda party. Well, but this is not the first time I am at YES. My first time was actually 11 years ago. Back to that time, I was a member of organization team. It was year 2008, and Yalta European strategy actually took place in Yalta. I really hope that one day, YES annual meetings will go back to Yalta, better sooner than later. And I also hope that new faces, the new generation in politics, will contribute to it. And now coming back to the topic of the panel discussion. This year, Ukraine saw a tremendous changes in political elites. But it is not only about changing of faces. This we have seen before in this country. This is really about changing generations. And what this generation changes means for Ukraine and the world. First of all, it means that democratization is inevitable. The new Verkhovna Rada is younger, there are more females. I will give you just few numbers. The average age of MPs of the current Verkhovna Rada is 41 years old. It used to be 48. There are 21% of female in this Verkhovna Rada. It used to be only 12. And this new composition of Verkhovna Rada also means that there are new values, new approaches, and new vision of the world, and this is important. Second of all, modernization is inevitable. You've already heard about Zelensky team approaches, about our innovative program from Mikhailo Fedorov, who was a part of the previous panel discussion about our initiative, the state in the smartphone. And this initiative is not only about reduction of corruption by eliminating human factor. It is also about the convenience of interaction between the human or between the people, citizens, and the state. It is about speeding up the process. It is about the, increasing the productivity and about saving the time. And third of all, what the generation changes mean for Ukraine and the world. It means that Ukraine's integration in the world and in Western world in particular is inevitable either. The new MPs as well as new ministers have traveled abroad a lot. Some of them have Western education. And this new generation, they don't have nostalgia over Soviet Union anymore. And thus, they don't long for Russia either, not as much as the previous generation did. It gives a better potential and more room for cooperation with the world and for further integration with Western countries. But of course, only if the Western countries will also keep moving forward Ukraine. So to sum up my speech, I think that the happiness is inevitable either, and that we will work hard to achieve it. Thank you.
Thank you. Happiness will come. The new generation is here. Could I pick up a point that was raised by Mr. Vakachuk, which I think is critical long term, and that is sort of personalities versus institutions. You now have a situation here which is not entirely unique, but somewhat unusual, in that there is an overwhelming mandate for one personality in one political party. It has thus not absolute power, but lots of power. It can achieve things. But having been in politics for quite some time, my experience is that sooner or later, to put it in as Americans would do, the shit hits the fan. Things start to go wrong. And that could be the economy, or that could be the word, or that could be something else. It's never straightforward. I wish it was, but it isn't. then the question of the quality of the institutions will really matter. And then the question is, do you understand, or is there sufficient understanding of the fact that a vibrant democracy requires a strong and determined executive, but also a strong and determined and effective opposition? And will there be a strong and determined opposition in the Rada, and will the Rada work in order to make that possible?
And, question for me? Or?
Well, for anyone, but since I alluded to you, okay. Why not?
So, thank you very much for this question. I think it's a fundamental question, not only for Ukraine, but generally for politics in the world, especially nowadays, after this kind of, new wave of politicians who give quick answers and easy solutions. We still don't know if it works or not, because it's only a very short time that we see it, we face it, we witness it. So I'm a big, strong believer of the rules and institutions. I'm a physicist by background. So in physics, we know that there are fundamental laws that are actually inevitable in order for world to operate, for universe to operate. I think to some extent politics is the same. It's certainly much less predictable. It's certainly much less, I would say, postulated. But generally, you still have laws. And especially if you look from helicopter view, and if you have a sort of a longer term of observation, for example, a generation or 10 years or more, and then you see very fundamental things. One of them gives me a very important hint. When I look on Western countries, which are, in my opinion, for us, for all of us, an example and probably some, kind of goal we want to approach, most of them are united by the fact that they have institutions that can survive any political leader, however strong or popular or unpopular or weak he or she is. And I think this is your British, Swedish, American, European biggest achievement. You've been building it you've been working on it probably for hundreds of years, but so finally it works. And I see our biggest role, personally my role and the role of our party, no matter how unpopular or how, kind of not fashionable, politically fashionable it is, anyway, to pursue institutional approach and to be always stick with the rule of law question. And I give you one example. Yesterday, there was a famous or infamous voting to change the Central Electoral Commission in Ukraine. This Electoral Commission was elected just a year ago, and for a 7-year term. It takes 300 votes, so constitutional majority, to replace it. It was done in order not to make it just a political idea to change the Electoral Commission just because a new team comes. Nevertheless, the new ruling coalition or mono majority presented this idea to change after a year, after, I think, 3 elections that all of you Westerners can accept. They presented the idea to change or replace all of them and condemning them that they are not working very well after 1 year. So I've seen it done by Poroshenko government. I've seen it done by Yanukovych government. I've seen it done by any presidents who came to power before. All of them promised to build institutions and to change rules, but mostly they don't. They leave the rules intact, but they change people. So this I call the weakness of institutions and the prevailing of political kind of interest above, bigger institutional things. So we were only like a little minority in the parliament who voted strictly against it. And contrary to our colleagues from the previous president's party, who probably have some political motivation for that, I don't know. We don't. I don't know personally nobody from this electoral commission. They're not my friends. I didn't elect them before. They don't defend me. I even don't know the names of some of them. But the rule is important for me, and this is a fundamental thing for all of us, and I hope it will be fundamental thing for everybody who is now talking about changing this country. It's not about just new people or new faces. Actually, every 5 or 10 years we have new faces. It's about institutions, rules, and principles. For us, this is a golden rule, and we'll fight for that till the end. And I believe that Ukraine will prosper when we finally establish rule of law and strong, sustainable institutions in this country.
That was a strong statement on an issue that I know is subject to a lot of debate at the moment. It requires an answer from someone. Why did this happen? Was that something that should make us worried about the state of the institutions?
I would allow myself to add something to your previous question and this question as well. First of all, regarding the role of opposition and procedures in the parliament. I'm sitting next to the Prime Minister of Sweden, the President of the European Parliament, and in European Union, and I've heard this before, everyone is irritated with the bureaucratization of many procedures. But these procedures ultimately help making proper, good decision. Not everything which is done quickly is for good and that it is well done. And I've seen many decisions that then were changed and reversed in the parliament. That's one. Second, each government thinks that they've come for good. Well, maybe if not for good, then for a long time at least. Beloved Ukrainian people, of course, from the feeling of happiness to the feeling of unhappiness, there's a very thin margin, thin line, and of course people change their opinion about the government, about politicians, and that's natural. But at the same time we need to remember one key thing. When the party or certain personality is in power, they have to make sure that they create such rules of the game that others would apply to you once you are in opposition. And I think that formula is the most efficient for any democracy, especially for the young democracies. I recall when the previous composition of the parliament, we all wanted very much for the rule and regulations of the parliament to reinstate all the norms and rules that were thrown out during Yanukovych's time in regards to opposition. But out of 8 draft laws that were registered to bring those norms regarding opposition back, none of them were even considered in the parliament. And they could have easily done it. If we could have brought back the chapter on opposition, we would have had a totally different parliament with totally different rules and regulations and more capacity for opposition to influence. And in fact, we didn't have it happen. And unfortunately, this is the heritage of those 5 years that we haven't used to build this fundamental possibility for the team in power and for minority to work efficiently. In terms of yesterday's voting, yes, it was rather a political decision rather than a legal one. And I do remember the previous composition of the Central Electoral Committee and how it was put together. There was Gendrimaga, very good members, or Zhana Senkochonka. They were not even allowed to be nominated into the Central. They told them no. We asked them as a minority, why not? Why you are not allowing these people who were standing for the rule of law to work again? Why are you depriving them from their work? They said no, no. And that seemed to be all right at that time because it was a political thing. What about now? Why now, when the new party decided to change the Central Electoral Committee and has done so in a way, by the way, in a way which is prescribed by the law, by the Constitution? 300 vote is a political decision, and the new Central Electoral Committee will be put together. And at the same time, I would like to say that my feeling is that not all members of the Central Electoral Committee, the new one, are going to be new faces. I have a feeling that some of the ones that are working there now will be re-elected to the new Central Electoral Committee, and I think that could be an option that would create this checks and balance and continuum. That's my personal feeling. This is why yesterday ourselves as the party of Batьківщина voted for this, because we think that if we are following the Constitution, even if it is a political decision, it can be voted in the Parliament.
I had a question, but really no question.
I let you back in, but first the speaker.
Very often we have discussions what is important, personalities or institutions. I would like to say that institutions were established for people and by people, so it's an important thing, but first of all, we need to understand that behind each and every of our decision of the institutions, there are people, the people who had delegated us for the interim. There's nothing permanent in this life. There's nothing in this life that would be for good. This is why we need to create, and it's correct, that there would institutions that would work before us, that would work during our tenure and after us. But we need to establish them deriving not from political expediency, but from the interests of the society and the state. We were saying that we require changes nowadays, and changes are happening in different directions, even inside the parliament itself, and I would like to thank those colleagues that are not part of the majority, but they are supportive of many smart, useful things that are being done for the society, for the country. If you look at the outcome of the voting, very often you have 300 votes, 350, 340, even for some of them 341 for some of the appointments. We understand that it is not time now to have political quarrels, to aggravate political quarrels and political battles. We have very little time for the transformation that have been so much looked forward to by the society, and this is why everyone is represented now in the country, in the parliament, the way they are, and this is an opportunity for us to make that transformation. I know that there will be more politics in the parliament later on. It will come, whether we want it or not. But this is the process that today allows the parliament, the cabinet of ministers and the president in the first place to make sure that those transformations that we have promised would be materialized. There's a very good and useful example. For 22 years they have been promising to lift the immunity from the parliament members, and there has always been an argument why not. This parliament lifted it in 2 days. I mean, you can keep discussing whether you need it or not. We promised and we did it. In Ukrainian conditions, preserving immunity for members of the parliament was impossible. When our fellow colleagues from European countries are comparing the immunity of the member of the parliament with the immunity that we have in Ukraine, these are two different things, big way. And I'm sure, therefore, that this parliament is already part of the history for having done this, and I'm grateful to everyone who has voted for this, and for many other actually things that today this 9th Parliament is doing for the sake of this country. When we are talking about institutions or versus personalities, we have to understand for the efficient institutions to arise, people in the parliament have to do their job. They have to make decisions. They have to pass legislative changes. For that to happen, there has to be interaction, dialogue and efficiency. We have witnessed what efficient parliament operation can look like. Speaking about anti-corruption policy that I'm dealing with in the anti-corruption team of Zelensky, for 5 years all expert community have been standing for the more independence for anti-corruption bureau for NABU, but only in this parliament these draft laws started to progress. MP immunity, we already mentioned this. Impeachment mechanism for the president. Also, same thing, we have been talking endlessly about this, but we promised this during the elections and we are working on this. And it is extremely important that in the discussions between how the procedures should look like, we would not forget why these procedures were put in place in the first place. They were put there to pass legislation, to make certain changes and to reform the country. We are intended to do these reforms. We have the political will and we are demonstrating this in the parliament. We are doing this fast because this was the kind of dynamics the Ukrainian societies have been looking forward to. Ukrainian society cannot just look in the paradigm of old rules, inefficient institutions, suffering from the bias of the law enforcement, from deficient courts, etc. This is why these changes will happen, and I'm sure that they will happen soon.
Certainly a vibrant debate. Mr. Vakarchuk, perhaps before I hand over back to Pat Cox.
Actually, my comment was very simple. So, you know, leaders or governments come to power because of usually 3 incentives. First is to make changes and probably to make history. Second is to grab power. And third is to become popular or to sustain popular. Sometimes these 3 you can combine 2 of them. But for us, or for me personally, I believe that the first one is the real one that is important, to make changes. And if your changes make you unpopular, do it. If your changes will actually lead to loss of the power, do it. Just do the first thing, do changes. And I hope that we will focus on this, the most important issue. So far, I have second thoughts about incentives of all people who come to power today. But let's see. I'm still optimistic, but most important, me and our party, Holos, are focused on the first thing. Changes, real changes in institutions. And we will fight here on the beaches, we will fight here on the field, we will fight here by Churchill, everywhere, and we shall overcome.
I want to thank Winston Vakarchuk for this inspiration. I tell you, we've just a very small few minutes left, and I'd like to slightly shift the gear if I could, because this is really fascinating, but it's hard to develop a whole other theme in 5 minutes. And my apologies in advance, Ivan, this question doesn't cover you, and let me explain. Political parties in this country are not political parties like we know them in mature democracies where they're around for a long time and so on. And so in a way, many times they're more political movements built around personalities. The one thing, and of course Batkivshina has its personality in Yulia Tymoshenko, but it's been around a long time. It has continuity, it has structures and so on. With the new political movements, and I don't know whether I should call all this a movement yet or a party, a thing that fascinated me that I'd never seen, and I thought was smart. You have a lot of new people, fantastic enthusiasm, great skills and backgrounds, but not knowing politics. So you went to politics school to do some grinds and some learning about systems and procedures. Alina, were you at that school? And could you talk to me a bit about what was it like? Was it a good idea? And forgive me, I don't ask it in such a way. Do you think you need to go to school again to do some other things as groups begin to mature from movement to party, from atomization as individuals to collective wisdom and consensus?
You know, the conceptual decision for the Zelensky team, the party of region, was to bring something new into politics, to bring new people in. But speaking about new people, it doesn't mean incompetency or inexperience. A lot of our fellow colleagues are very experienced, they have very good background. Speaking about myself, I already participated in the political school. 2014, 2015, I was the councillor in the city of Kyiv, and I've gone through a lot of trials. But speaking about other fellow colleagues, they were working, they were drafting reforms, they were proposing to the previous governments, to the previous parliaments, but unfortunately much more energy had to be spent not for developing and drafting the reforms, but to convince these members of the previous government that these changes are to be made. And this is why we have a unique chance to use all of our political experience, reformers' experience, professional experience for the good purpose, for the good cause. And we don't need to convince anyone any longer. We don't need to work to push them. We don't need to push the parliament to do something to show their political will, because this political will is there, and we are demonstrating this. I think Galina is right. A lot of people have gone through some sort of school, including political school. They don't have experience of this big politics, and therefore probably they are represented in the parliament because they haven't been spoiled by it. But speaking about experience and the knowledge on the individual level, if you look at the electoral lists of the party of region, I think none of the political parties would be able to boast that big number of the candidates that would be PhDs. A lot of them are representatives of the legal profession, of the bar, who understand better than many other people what needs to be changed in the legislature, because the parliament is the supreme legislative body, and these were the kinds of people we were lacking there. Of course, there are less of these professional politicians there, but sufficient number of reformers, experts in different fields with high morale that managed to bring in the changes that the parliament needs now. And we have been discussing with you regarding the changes that need to be done in the rules and regulations of the parliament, and the mechanisms that are described there sometimes are not clear to you, and they do not comply with the European principles that we are trying to aspire to so much. So a big plus of our team is that we are ready to change, we are ready to change ourselves, and we are ready to listen. And I think that is very important for any politician, especially in Ukrainian realities.
First of all, let me not answer directly this question, because if I answer directly, the best thing is to ask people here to vote who is the most professional, and you guess what the result will be. But let me ask you a little bit indirectly. I get your question not as a question of how professional is your team, but I get your question as, are you willing, do you understand that it's only the beginning? Yes. Oh yes, we do understand that, and every day we learn a lot, and we certainly just go to the first grade of political school, and thankfully, thanks to our colleagues on the left and on the right, they provide us with a great practical lessons every day. Believe me.
Ivan, are you planning to go to postgraduate school then? Or what comment do you want to make on this?
Дякую за чудове питання.
Thank you for a good question. In reality, there's always this dilemma between whether you become part of something new, which is trendy, or going to the political parties with history and with your experience, with your energy, try to achieve success there. I'm happy to be part of the team, of the party, which has had a long political history in Ukraine. We are the only political force that was selected within the same brand and was part of the previous and one before that. We have to build a political system. For each parliament we have new brands coming in, which is like disposable brands, and then they are not there in the next parliament. How are you going to build this political history of Ukraine that we have seen in the old democracy countries? We want the parties to also have this preliminary weighing or screening or funneling of the politicians, but the person who gets to be nominated from the parliament, when you are funneled all the way through, when you go into the parliament, to be an off-the-shelf good politician. You wouldn't have to learn anything new. You would know how to behave in the parliament. In that context, I would like to say that in Ukraine there will be for sure a trend. After the trend for something new, there will be trend for professionalism, and we will be building a political system that we see in our partner countries. That's the parliament I dream of, and that's the country I dream of, but not to each time be chasing the new brand without understanding what this stands behind it.
Thank you all very much. Look at this morning, young Prime Minister, young ministers, young Speaker, young party leader, young deputies, 2 old guys at the end. It's most inspiring. I think your country is in good hands. We wish you every success. Please be open to argue like hell with each other. Pluralist democracy and fighting over detail is the lifeblood of good democracy, and you all have that capacity clearly and appetite to do it. I want to invite you now to join us for lunch. It's directly across, and the lunch will begin in the next 10 minutes. Thank you all very much indeed for your attention and your presence this morning.